So thanks everyone for joining us for this symposium today. We're going to be talking about how AI and smartphone technology can improve the prevention and treatment of depression and anxiety in young people. And with strong evidence pointing towards a rise in the prevalence of these common mental health conditions, it's never been more important to capitalise on the technological innovations that have been transforming mental health research at this rapid rate. So as part of this symposium, we aim to really drill down into examining some of the ways in which these novel technologies, such as artificial intelligence and smartphone sensing, can improve our ability to understand, treat, monitor, and intervene for young people experiencing these mental health conditions. Our first speaker today is Dr. Saranga Kasturi, who's going to be talking about how mobile-based digital phenotyping can improve the early detection and prevention of depression in adolescents at scale. Following this, our second speaker, Associate Professor Sunil Gupta from Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, is going to be talking about a novel digital platform called Conductor that combines AI with adaptive trial technology to transform mental health research. After this, I'll be presenting on the first application of this AI-driven adaptive trial technology to the field of digital mental health for young adults with depression and anxiety. Our fourth speaker, Associate Professor Christian Webb from Harvard Medical School, will be presenting on how passive sensing can help us improve the detection of states of elevated negative affect in adolescents. And then our fifth speaker, Professor Helen Christensen from the Black Dog Institute and the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, is going to be drawing these lines of evidence and data together to talk about how technology and AI can address some of psychiatry's greatest challenges. So together, we hope to highlight how these different technologies can help us reach the scale needed to bend the curve on the rising trajectory of youth mental ill health. So with that, I will hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Saranga Kasturi, who's a research fellow at the Black Dog Institute and University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. All right, thanks very much, Saranga. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much. So I am going to start by sharing my screen. And I will switch to presentation mode. Alexis, can you confirm if folks can see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am happy to go first and start talking about some of the challenges and experiences that we've had in this particularly new green opportunity working with mobile-based sensor datasets and using them for digital phenotyping in the mental health domain. So as Alexis mentioned, my name is Saranga Kasturi. I am a computer scientist and informatician by training. I've had a number of years of experience working on a variety of different health and medical-based datasets across the healthcare domain. And I'm happy to apply my expertise on this new and innovative challenge. I'll start by really quickly explaining the use case or the source of the data that we were using for this initiative. As we know, depression is a significant mental health challenge impacting the health of individuals and communities. We also know that in many cases, depression can emerge during an individual's adolescence, and that it's important to detect and prevent depression at scale. The study that my work is based on is a landmark effort to investigate the efforts of a large statewide mobile-based preventive scale to test the effectiveness of an universal digital intervention across adolescents. we worked with to recruit up to 6,000 different adolescents from across several states. And then using a mobile-based application, um, evaluated and monitored their behaviors and activities, collected a variety of sensor data on these individuals, and then tried to understand what this data tells us about their mental health and well-being. So I'm going to dive in really quickly. When I even start talking about digital health phenotyping, I always like to start with this big picture. So we've traditionally understood that health and well-being are driven by a variety of very different influences. They can be our healthcare access, things like what kind of and quality of access we receive to healthcare. They can cover our healthy behaviors, tobacco use, diet and exercise, alcohol use, our physical environment, and socioeconomic factors that we must live and grow in. So when I start talking about phenotyping, I always present this picture as a guideline of what kind of information we should be looking at. Obviously, when you look at this picture, you understand that health behaviors and physical environment play a very big role in all matters dealing with our health and well-being, particularly with depression. Unfortunately, we haven't been very good at effectively capturing and measuring these data elements. To date, we rely on secondary data collected via screening tools to understand an individual's health and well-being. However, this data can be quite biased, they are not real time, and they might be subject to an individual's prejudices. In contrast, being able to use mobile-based sensor data helps us create a far better picture of what an individual really does versus what they think that they do. So starting off, I'll speak really quickly on the breadth and modalities of sensor data. As you know, sensor data is all around us from a variety of smart devices, Fitbits, our smartphones, etc. They can be used to capture our motions, our position in a geospatial, in a geographic environment, as well as our immediate surroundings. A broad variety of sensor data exist. The most popular types include things like GPS, accelerometer, gyroscope, pressure, and heart rate. Um, Often there's a lot of unknowns around what sensor data looks like. Um, Here's a quick picture of what you could expect when you are collecting GPS data. What you're seeing is an XML data a document that presents an individual's movement as they took part in an activity. In this case, it's a noon hike through Peeler Lake. So you see that over time, their latitude and longitude are changing. So we have a measure of where they are physically located, including their elevation and the timestamp associated with it. So we have a picture as they move through time, how they are moving across this environment. So the data that we are dealing with can be quite structured and comprehensive in this way. So yes, through future proofing, we are collecting a broad variety of sensor data. In that case, why are creating digital phenotypes so challenging? Why can't we just build upon existing research and evidence? The problem is that a lot of the existing efforts that have focused on GPS data, firstly, haven't focused on phenotyping, and secondly, are controlled by very formal and rigid guidelines. For example, a variety of existing efforts focus on regular time delimited data sampling. There's a breadth of data captured at regular intervals. There's also standardization in terms of what mobile devices and versions are used. Further, they are often restricted to a brief, small geographic area. In contrast, Future Proof was performed across a variety of states. So we had to deal with urban and rural locations, as well as the challenges with accuracy that this led to. One might imagine that GPS data is of a higher quality and more accurate at urban setting. Unfortunately, that's not true because you are dealing with a large population, you are dealing with tall buildings that might block your signal, you are often traveling underground in subway areas or car parks, so the signals can be quite sparse and sketchy. Finally, we focused on raw data and used the raw data to create composite independent metrics. Um, in contrast, other solutions that were dependent on specific mobile devices could use existing applications, things like Fitbit or Apple Health Kit, to leverage existing composite metrics of individual behaviors. Moving on. So, what drove the questions around what we modeled for phenotypes? Um, I tried my best to identify a sweet spot between what we can identify and what we should be identifying, given that ultimately we had a variety of other data sets, including survey data, to supplement our digital phenotypes. So I started with what can we identify and narrowed my way down to what we should identify using the censored data. Um, I think the analogy to the parable of the blind men trying to understand what elephant looks like is very appropriate here, because ultimately sensor data can be very different from different perspectives. To understand the most valuable perspective, you have to look at it from all sides and understand the best cost-effective way to get the richest information from this high volume data set. In terms of algorithmic decision making for phenotyping, there's a variety of approaches from the most simple to the most complex. I focused on the most simple because they were easy to reproduce, works well with real world data, and allow us to clearly understand what phenotypes we were creating. Early assessment of the future proofing dataset. We started off with 1,851 participants. Um, After cleaning and processing the data, we realized that only 94% of them actually had GPS movement. And for these patients, for these participants, we had over 2.5 million GPS data points. We performed significant data cleaning and error detection by using an individual's horizontal and vertical accuracy as a measure of how accurate and trustworthy each GPS coordinate was. So we used an outlier-based approach to basically chop out GPS elements we were not confident with. Um, Looking at this data from a geolocation-based perspective, this is a fake data set presenting how an adolescent may travel over time. And of course, this is adolescent, so they are not really being super adventurous. They have regular locations they go to. But when you look at this fake movement, you get the idea that they either live in Arena and go to school in Mount Durit, or vice versa. Their behaviors are very, expected. They have a very set routine. And you also, of course, notice that it's possible that this participant took a vacation to the Blue Mountains. That's why you see this isolated set of dots somewhere around the Blue Mountain region. So what does this tell us? Well, it's very hard to tell a story just based on the movement. So let's look at clustering. By clustering and focusing on how frequently an individual is based at a certain location, we now have a better picture of their frequent haunts. Um, they might be homes, friends' houses, stores, or schools. Next, we add in temporality and social context to better understand what this movement could mean. To do that, we identify meaningful usable units of time. So for example, yes, you have all these 2.5 million rows of data. How much of those come into usable day-based units? By applying our own internal cutoff thresholds, we found that 1,100 participants, or 62%, had at least 50 rows of data per day, which is adequate first to appropriately monitor their projection or movement over time. An alternate might be to look at hour-based slots. So instead of just looking at the best days, look at the best hours where we had adequate data. We use these to identify proper movement patterns. Because we had access to each participant's school, we were then able to identify their homes and then use these two main focus points to understand their movement and interests across this base. This could be used to detect a myriad of different factors, everything from how often they were not at school during school hours, how far they traveled to school, and how often they were away from home on late nights. We were also able to identify different types of movement. So for example, are you walking, jogging, or running? Are you traveling fast but not actually exerting yourself? So for example, are you traveling fast on a bike or traveling fast on a car? Given that detecting these modalities were very challenging, we instead focused on identifying on clear exertion versus other situations where you're just uh, moving fast but not really exerting yourself. So instead of dividing them across each type of movement, we just did a Boolean yes, no. Are you moving on your own or not? Um, this provided some interesting outcomes. And the results you're seeing here are very early and will likely change as we apply different thresholds. But on a more basic sense, we are able to show that up to 54% of our participants show evidence of healthy walking, meaning that they walk up to 1 hour per day for 80% of the days they have reported. Up to 28% show evidence of regular walking. That is, they have a pattern of walking that's similar across each day. And we also see that up to 45% show evidence of long travel times to school. That is, they are taking at least 1 hour across 70% of the days to go to what we identify as their school location. I will wrap up with some major challenges. So yes, we identified a variety of individual level activities. Translating them into population level measures is quite challenging. Yes, we can tell a pretty picture of here's how participant A moved over time, but translating that into a common picture of the population is going to be a lot trickier. Um, Filtering out what is valuable to measure given other datasets we have access to is also challenging given the different modalities and opportunities to inspect the data. Finally, we had to work with inherent limitations and variations across each device. Each device might have different accuracy levels. Each participant might have different version of the same device. Unfortunately, that is not up to us and we had no control over it. With that, I'm aware of time. I am going to pause my presentation and pass on to Alexis.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that overview of some of the challenges and intricacies with digital phenotyping, Saranga. So I'm going to move into our next speaker now for the symposium. Associate Professor Sunil Gupta is the head of Artificial Intelligence Optimization and Materials Discovery at the Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute, or A2I2, at Deakin University in Victoria, Australia. He's going to be sharing us some insights into a new digital trial platform for running AI-optimized adaptive trials. Thanks, Sunil. I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Alexis, for the nice introduction. Let me start with sharing my screen. So let me know if you can see my slides and then I'll take on here.
If you expand to presenter presentation, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, welcome everyone. So today I am going to talk about our ongoing work that's been happening for last 1.5 to 2 years in the space of AI for running clinical trials to optimize and transform mental health treatment research. So I am an AI researcher, and I work in broad areas of machine learning. And AI has, in the last few years, developed quite efficient way of deciding among multiple interventions, treatments, with the some kind of sample efficient approach, meaning you can get the studies done just a few participants and many other nice properties you will see. This is a joint work with colleagues at Applied AI Institute at Deakin University, Australia, and the colleagues at Black Dog Institute, and people from Center for Digital Transformation of Health. So without any further ado, I'll just jump in. So as you all already, the audience of mental health and psychiatry and things, and psychology, so you know that mental health disorders account for a large part of disease in both in Australia, and almost 800 million people suffer from these from worldwide. So when we want to try out any mental health intervention to, as Alexis said earlier, to bend the curve. So the challenge we encounter is the enormous variability among people. Everyone is somewhat different, and they have their unique need, and that brings us that, okay, then there is a potential for personalized treatment option or interventions. So we were like thinking, how do you tackle this problem? And then with significant adult population having a smartphone in their pocket, so we thought it could be a great opportunity to provide healthcare or this kind of interventions digitally. Sorry for my patchy voice today. So when we go and study any such interventions, normal workhorse for these are the random control trials, which are the gold standard for this kind of studies. RCTs normally allocate equal number of participants to each arm, and then collect data as they go and over a study period, and then eventually analyze which say intervention or treatment come out to be the best, and various other properties. So one of the limitation of RCTs are that they're not necessarily very sample efficient. When I use the word sample efficient, means how many participants we need to really get our study done and find the conclusions that we are looking for. So many interventions may have low variance, which means, let's say, is not as much variability as the other interventions are showing up in the population. But RCTs will not do anything about it, and rather continue to allocate many people to all the arms, equal number of people to all the arms, and therefore will not be able to achieve the same kind of statistical significance that may be possible otherwise. And the other thing is that personalization is one of the limitation in RCTs. Like, although there are some methods which could attempt in more complex RCTs, but that is where standard RCTs do not give any opportunity to personalize. And finally, and actually very importantly, that suppose people participate in a trial and then they would like to be put on the best treatment. Whereas RCT will say, I need to study all my interventions or all my treatments, so I would equally randomize to everything. And some people are not very satisfied with that. And that's where even ethical points come into picture. So for many of these problems can be actually solved by adaptive allocation. We'll be getting in that further. So when we did our work, so we had a few desiderata in mind. So one thing what we would like to do is in our trial that we would like to allocate participants to quickly identify the best treatments, because that is our goal. But at the same time, we allocate more people to good treatments that I like to call welfare maximization, but there may be better terms to say about it. And use participants' information to determine what is the best treatment for them, which is the personalization angle. But at the same time, we do not want to come up with conclusions that this treatment is good for this person and that treatment is good for that person, which means how do you put this into practice, because then there will become too many rules. So how to minimize, this kind of fragmented rules. So instead of going at very individual level, we might say we go at a cohort level, which is a middle ground, that people like this should be put on this kind of interventions or treatments. So keeping this in mind, we have developed this platform called Conductor. And Conductor is a platform which can be used for a wide varieties of, wide set of studies, primarily right now driven for mental health applications, but I think it can be even extended to cover various other healthcare applications and related fields. So Conductor is a platform where you could collect data based on any website driven or app driven. You could do different kind of trials, and then you could also do other kind of studies where you could predict people's outcomes and things. So in this, definitely our focus in this talk is Conductor platform and Vibe study, which is the study for university-wide in Australia. How do you optimize or study the best mental health treatments or interventions for Australian young cohort? So I will a little bit touch upon that, and my colleague and the chair Alexis will further talk about this Vibe study. So, and then I'll be delving more into the details of this adaptive trial algorithm. So coming back to Conductor allows various kind of randomized trials, and in the current form, it is still developing to cover more and more interesting use cases. So it uses, right now, it allows the functionality of having a smartphone that can deliver self-care strategies. It is focused right now, as I said, on psychological distress for university students, and it has the capability to use AI methods to find the most effective strategy, predictive analytics, mining patterns, and things like that. And as you can see that currently, when you do not use a platform like this, then normally any studies are done via a human counselor, and therefore they cannot scale as well as this platform. And so right now, in Conductor, we got a couple of apps and functionalities. Vibe is one of them. We also have other projects which we call future proofing and under the radar. These are all funded to us by different funding bodies in Australia. So Conductor allows some kind of EMA, which is like EMA, like ecological momentary assessment. So you could in real time measure people's behavior, and especially in the environment they're living. So and all kind of passive sensing, like Suranga was talking earlier, that we could collect a lot of data so that we can predict changes in their condition, stress, and so on. So Conductor is a very, there are many ways to present Conductor, and can be very technically, details like for which software engineers would like to know, but I would present it in a very functional sense. So it allows stratification. So whenever any trial is done or data is collected, then it can also allow different kind of stratification. It allows the functionality of either website-based or app, which can be downloaded. It allows user verification so that things can be done in the way we want. Then it allows different kind of baselines, like so that how they are normally living, and if you do any interventions, so what kind of improvements or degradations one can observe. Then there are optimizers to say, well, this is the trial thing, that how do you use AI and try to allocate things in the best possible manner so that you can maximize the study outcomes, like finding the best interventions and things, but at the same time you can do the best allocation for individual satisfaction and things. Then there are it kind of allows it allows the execution or conduction of the interventions, which means people can take them, come back with question, like come and write the self-reported questionnaires and so on, and then post-study for this. So there are other applications, as I mentioned, that we have like quite good configurability, which means you can always replace this module and bypass with another functionality. For example, some of our studies do not have optimizers, so you can switch to directly to the post-study. Some of the other studies do not have, for example, there is no app, so you can always work with a website base. So this is fairly configurable with little effort. And as we see that this can not only be used within this use cases we are considering, rather for general trials. For example, one normally sees in, for example, drug discovery or dosage trials and so on. So I'll a little bit talk about this VibeUp thing, but I'm very aware that Alex is going to talk more about these things. So the way Conductor has been configured for VibeUp study is that it onboards students for 4-week mini trial, and then tries 3 interventions and an active control. As I said, it's running Australia-wide, including Deakin and UNSW students. And we intend to do the whole trial in a sequence of several mini trials, and we have planned 12 mini trials. So this is giving you a rough picture of how someone onboards, and then we do some kind of onboarding data collection, and then there is algorithm, AI-based algorithm allocates a particular intervention, and then we again put them on intervention for 2 weeks, and then collect this questionnaire or some kind of instrument to measure their depression, anxiety, and stress, both before and after. Once the first mini trial finishes, then we move into the second mini trial, and so on. Normally, each mini trial lasts for months, 4 weeks, as I said. So as you can see that this functionality, especially for the VibeUp study, we have got the apps both for iPhones and also Android devices, and this is available for people to download. They have quite nice sleek functionality, which users have normally liked. It allows them to know different kind of things, data capture, easy uploading of questionnaire, and as I said, a lot of configurability. So they could pretty much report just like any modern app, and there are surveys which indicate that they're very good. So I'll now a little bit touch upon the adaptive trial algorithm. Alexis, how many minutes do I have remaining?
We're a bit over time already, Sunil. So
okay, so I'll be very quick. Yeah. So I think this is going to use a multi-arm bandit. So what multi-arm bandits do is they consider multiple arms just like in our trials, and they're trying to adaptively allocate in a non-uniform manner, unlike RCT, to find the best treatment as we go in the trial. And definitely the next mini trial would use the data from the previous mini trial to decide who to allocate. So there may be a bit of selection bias, but those are removed or corrected for in the later stages. And it can use the participants' features or context, for example, general stress level, which can be measured through EMA, or there other information if we want to. So in this case, I think, as I was saying, for the adaptive trial part, we look at whenever we recommend a treatment or intervention. So we take the DAS score, which is our effect, like stress level measurement, just before the intervention, which we call here midpoint, because the first one is simply onboarding, which is used to decide which cohort, or in a way we could say the group, are they normally having this mild condition or moderate condition or severe. So these are the 3 groups we have decided, and based on these groups we see before the intervention what is their stress level, and after the intervention what is their stress level, and is there a positive change or negative change. So I won't go into details of how this group allocation is done, but the pretty much algorithm has an initialization phase where we sort of equally allocate people to each, randomized to each arm, and then onwards algorithms take over and goes through, looks at the performance of each arm and like progressively allocates. And then we also have a component of offline hypothesis testing, which sets the course of the trial. So as I said, initialization is 1:1:1, and after that we go into this thing. So another thing is like to know how good a particular treatment is doing is simply the difference between the dash scores at the last point and the midpoint. So I won't go into details of contextual MAB, multi-arm bandit, but if you need to know, then I would like to highlight that it simply uses a model to predict the difference between the post and midpoint rewards. And it tries to kind of use a upper confidence bound, essentially using an optimistic algorithm for any technical people here. So it fits a model for each treatment and goes for any individual, sees which treatment seems to be the most promising, and definitely, although we're using different treatments and different groups, but it seamlessly integrates all the data from all the participant groups. And then once it has reached to multiple mini trials, then we might ask a question that have we found the best intervention already? If we have found the best intervention already, so what we do is we remove it from its further trialing so that we can allocate all our budget to the next set of treatment. So that is how it works, so that we could get multiple good interventions, if possible, within our study period. And as I said, that because we do many non-standard statistics, so we need to be careful of any biases, selection bias, and so on. We do also multiple arms and repeated statistical tests. So we do appropriate statistics to kind of take care of all those biases. As I said, adaptive trials are getting very popular. In fact, there is a FDA guideline on this. You can just simply Google and find out. So it describes the important principles for designing, conducting, and reporting the results. Yeah, so pretty much that, and some references I used here. Thanks for your attention. Alexis, over to you.
Yes, thanks so much, Sunil. That was great. I'll take over now, just share my screen. Do you mind stop sharing on your end? Thanks.
Thanks.
Great. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Alexis Witten. I'm a clinical researcher at the Black Dog Institute and University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. And as part of this talk, I'm going to follow on from what Sunil just talked about to explain the Vibe Up study, which is the first application of AI-optimized adaptive trial technology in the field of digital mental health. Now, before we dive in, let's talk briefly about why Vibe Up was launched. So depression and anxiety are really common mental health conditions, and they're especially prevalent in young adults. In fact, the findings of a recent report that we published here at the Black Dog Institute just a few weeks ago indicates that the prevalence of depression has more than doubled in young adults under the age of 25 in the past 2 decades. So it makes this a really critical issue to address in today's young people. Now, university students or college students are a cohort of mostly young adults who experience a disproportionate level and burden of these common mental health symptoms compared to both age-matched peers, but also compared to the general population. And data from Australia here shows that almost half of Australian university students report moderate to high levels of depression or anxiety. And these statistics have been mirrored in studies that have been conducted internationally. So there are a variety of factors that contribute to this, including the dramatic shifts in social support networks and lifestyles, as well as stressors that come with entering university. And identifying ways to better help university students manage these symptoms is really important, because we know that untreated depression and anxiety increases the risk of university dropout. It impairs relationships and puts them at risk of substance misuse, as well as suicide. So one approach to helping university students reduce rates of depression and anxiety is to deliver strategies that modify perceived responses to psychosocial stressors. So meta-analytic evidence confirms the potential usefulness of a range of different strategies, including mindfulness, physical activity, as well as sleep hygiene to reduce depression and anxiety in this population. However, as Sunil mentioned, many of these interventions need to be delivered face-to-face. They require multiple sessions and they're very resource intensive. And given just how many university students are experiencing these symptoms, scalability is a really critical issue. Furthermore, we also know that there's quite a lot of evidence for all of these strategies, and it's fairly unclear which strategies are going to work best or which ones will work best for who. So digitally delivered interventions, particularly those disseminated through smartphones, offer a solution to this scalability issue. They offer a way to deliver short duration targeted interventions in response to transient stressors. So this could be particularly useful around exam time. There's good evidence for their effectiveness. We all know that digital interventions do suffer from low adherence. However, this can be boosted through good user experience design and also co-design with the target population. So as part of this, we developed the Vibe Up app, which is available on iOS and Android. And the Vibe Up app offers a way to implement a set of brief digital mental health interventions directly to university students via their smartphones. Now, the Vibe Up application includes at present 3 digital interventions that target mindfulness, physical activity, and sleep hygiene. And it also allows for the delivery of an active control intervention, which is ecological momentary assessment. Each of these interventions are very brief. They're 2 weeks, and they teach users practical skills in these domains. They're also designed to be loosely matched on dose and required effort over the 14-day intervention period, allowing us to compare relatively equal types of treatments in a single trial. Now, we know from prior research in digital mental health that in order for these interventions to be engaging and have adequate levels of uptake, they need to be user-friendly in order to drive adherence. And so as part of the development of Vibe Up, we engaged in a formative user-centered design process. This incorporated a team of UX designers that we have here at the Black Dog Institute. They identified design elements and features to promote initial as well as sustained engagement with the interventions and tasks. So in this design phase, this informed the creation of a simple game-like mechanism based on the evolution of this virtual character named Sprout. Sprout slowly progresses from infancy to adulthood as the user continues to engage with the app over the course of the trial. And embedded within the app are simple animations representing this evolution, and they're used to provide this sense of delight and reward in response to using the app. In addition to this feature, we also adopted a number of other features, such as delivering intervention strategies in really small bite-sized chunks with minimal text. We made it so that they could implement strategies anywhere and with minimal resources. And at the end of the intervention period, we also provide users with a personalized report that showed them how their well-being and skills were tracking over the course of the intervention. Now, this trial was run and implemented on the Conductor platform, and this is a schematic that explains how participants for each mini trial, so they're run through sequential 2-week mini trials, how participants enter the trial and how the AI algorithm is used to optimize randomization to each of the interventions. So basically, we start with these 4 interventions. So it's the 3 intervention conditions plus the active control. And initially, we start with equal allocation of participants to each of those 4 interventions. After the first mini trial is complete, the algorithm looks at the change in outcome measures for participants as they experience each of the interventions. And then it uses this multi-arm bandit algorithm to optimize participant allocation to the next sequential mini trial. As each mini trial progresses, participant allocation to each of the interventions begin to skew towards the most beneficial interventions and away from the least beneficial interventions. And by doing this, we hope to increase the efficiency of the trial by reducing allocation to suboptimal interventions. In terms of our outcome measures, these are also collected through the VibeUp app. Self-report questionnaires assess primary outcome measures of psychological distress, which is measured using the Depression, Anxiety and Stress Scales total score. Secondary measures also tap into key domains of each of the 4 interventions. So we've got a measure of physical activity, sleep quality, a bespoke mindfulness measure that we developed, as well as a measure of positive and negative affect. Now, the primary objectives of this AI-optimized adaptive digital mental health trial are as follows. So we really want to know, of all these interventions, can this method identify the one that is the most effective overall? As a second layer, we're really interested in tailoring. So can this method identify the most effective intervention for individuals who are entering the trial with mild, moderate, or severe symptom levels? In addition to these aims, we're looking at how the sample size and duration of this trial compares with a traditional RCT that would be required to implement a 4-arm trial. And also, as part of this, we're partnering with health economists at Macquarie University to ask, well, is this adaptive trial more cost-effective and efficient than running a traditional RCT? The progress to date is that we've run 10 out of 12 sequential mini trials with a total sample size of just over 1,500 university students. We're having good retention. So from pre to post, just over 80% of participants are completing our post-intervention measures. In terms of the sample, we're seeing a strong proportion of female students signing up, and also more than half have a diagnosed mental health condition. We do have some secondary aims of this study, however. As part of the VibeUp app, we have embedded additional features that we believe could help to enhance the prediction of mental ill health. So firstly is the integration of digital phenotyping, and secondly is the integration of this continuous EMA. So we really want to know, is it feasible to implement digital phenotyping and EMA in the context of this AI adaptive trial? With digital phenotyping, as Saranga mentioned earlier, we're using the VibeUp app to collect a range of different data streams from passive sensors, including GPS, accelerometer, gyroscope, and step count. And a key aim of this study is to assess the data quality. Pending data quality, we also are really curious to know whether digital phenotyping markers can predict variation in depression and anxiety, as well as responses to the different interventions. In terms of the EMA collection, so all participants complete a brief run of EMA prior to being randomized to their intervention. And in addition, those assigned to the active control go on to complete EMA as part of their intervention. What we really want to know here is whether or not participants complete a sufficient number of EMA surveys for us to be able to conduct meaningful analyses. For those analyses, we're really interested in knowing how university students are resilient to experience negative affect and whether the interventions can modify this. And as another future direction, we're hoping to explore the application of natural language processes to evaluate coping strategies that university students record using EMA. So this is just the first in what hopefully is a series of many novel trials using this AI adaptive trial methodology. Other applications, which Helen will go into at the end, looking at whether we can use this methodology to tailor treatment based on individuals' preferences, based on certain demographic characteristics, but also looking at comparing different novel interventions and whether interventions can be optimized to target a range of different outcome measures. And as part of this study, it reflects a mammoth team across 4 different institutes. So I just want to acknowledge all the team members that have been involved in delivering this. It's been a huge effort. And thank you to everybody for being involved and presenting here today. Okay, so I'll stop sharing here. And then I'll hand over to the next speaker in our symposium today. So our next speaker is Associate Professor Christian Webb, who is with the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's also the director of the Treatment and Etiology and Depression in Youth Lab at McLean Hospital. So Christian's going to be talking to us again about an application of smartphone sensor data in addressing youth mental ill health. So Christian, I'll hand it over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Whitten. Let me share screen. Alexis, can you let me know if you can see my slides?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, so I'll be presenting some recent work from our lab focused on trying to predict states of high negative affect in teens using smartphone sensors. So there are studies showing that the frequency of negative emotions increase during adolescence, in particular for teen girls. So this is by negative affect here, we mean anger, anxiety, sadness. And so here are figures from 3 studies showing these trends of increases in negative affect during adolescence, and paralleling the research on increases in negative emotions in teens. There's a large body of research showing that rates of clinical depression increase during the adolescent years. And depression, of course, includes negative affective states, in particular sadness, which is a defining symptom. And these trends in depression really mirror the trends in negative emotions. Specifically, as shown in this bottom right-hand figure, depression rates increase during the adolescent years, in particular for teen girls in red, compared to teen boys in blue. And given these increases, there's a need to try to develop data-driven approaches to identify and ideally interrupt these states of emotional distress in teens as they occur in real time in their daily lives. So we've been interested in using smartphone data to try to do that, to try to predict these states. Why focus on smartphones? Well, first, the percentage of teens who own their own smartphone has increased dramatically in recent years and increases as a function of age, as shown here. Most adolescents, around 85%, own their own smartphones. These are US data. I've seen similar data in the UK and Canada also. And smartphones can continuously and relatively unobtrusively measure behaviors that might be predictive of shifts in affect in teens, like activity levels from the phone's accelerometer, location from GPS, metadata on calls and texts. And one of the key benefits of smartphone data is that this is passive data and there's no user input required. And when teens are immersed in a negative emotional state, some teens might be less likely to report on their experiences via conventional and more burdensome self-report. So to the extent that we could use smartphone data to generate reasonably accurate real-time predictions of states of high negative affect in teens, then brief interventions could be immediately deployed via smartphone notifications or mental health apps to try to alleviate these states. So in terms of study design, panel A here is showing our study timeline. Panel B is showing our variables assessed. In this initial study, we had 22 teens, ages 13 to 18, recruited for heightened experiences of negative emotions. Specifically, we recruited teens at the baseline clinical assessment who had elevated depressive symptoms. At the baseline, or after the baseline assessment, they downloaded the BWE app on their iPhone or Android for passive data collection. They had the app on their phone for 3 months. So in this study, I'll be presenting, we collected phone accelerometer and GPS data and some phone use data. We didn't have in this data set metadata on calls or texts or wrist-worn actigraphy data. We do have that in an ongoing study, which I won't be presenting today. We also collected ecological momentary assessment or EMA smartphone surveys. These were brief surveys, 2 to 3 surveys per day, every other week for 3 months, assessing current levels of sadness, anxiety, and anger. Those were our outcome variables. And panel C at the bottom here is showing our deep phenotyping dashboard, or DP- for short, which is a pipeline for processing and visualizing subject level passive smartphone data. So this was developed by Justin Baker and his colleagues in our Institute for Technology and Psychiatry at McLean. And panel D is just showing one subject's processed accelerometer and GPS data that you can see in DP-. So on the y-axis here, you've got time of day, x-axis, day in the study. Color represents changes in activity levels here or changes in location. Okay, to make this more concrete, here's an example of just one teen in this study. We followed them for 3 months. We had these brief smartphone surveys. This is just showing their sadness levels. This dotted line is showing their average level of sadness. And you can see these discrete spikes in this teen's sadness over time. That's what we're trying to predict with smartphone sensors. And for our 3 outcome variables, which were high sadness, high anxiety, high anger, of course, a question there is, how do you define high? What counts as a high state? There are different ways that you could define those thresholds, and there's pros and cons to different approaches. Briefly, we used a couple different approaches which yielded similar findings, but they're all focused on person-specific deviations from your mean level of a given negative emotion. So is there a large enough increase in your sadness to count as a state of high sadness? So for this teen here, these red dots represent their states of high sadness as we define them. And this is just showing some more information on the specific variables we extracted from the GPS data, accelerometer data, and phone use data. These are our predictor variables. So from the GPS data, we could get estimates of how much time the teen spends at home, places they visit hourly and daily, how active they are. And we have different metrics of phone use, which is basically just the phone being locked or unlocked. So if it's unlocked if you're using it. And then we could get estimates of sleep onset time, wake time, and sleep duration from these other variables. And of course, we have the time of day, which could influence mood in teens. There could be important differences between adolescents in the behavioral patterns that signal the onset of a negative emotional state. So for example, a teen with elevated anxiety might show increased or maybe decreased activity levels as measured from their phone's accelerometer, or maybe increased versus decreased interaction with their smartphone. And so because of these between-person differences, we wanted to use a person-specific or a personalized modeling approach, meaning fitting a unique statistical model to each individual. But at the same time, certain predictive relationships between passive smartphone data and negative emotional states might be shared across individuals. So because of that, we wanted to use a hybrid analytic approach that integrates person-specific models, that is developing a unique model for every individual, with a data-driven search for the optimal weighting across all subject-specific models, that is borrowing information from the prediction models of other individuals in the sample to see if that improves predictive performance for a given individual. And that's what we're calling a personalized ensemble model, because it's an ensemble of individual or subject-specific models. So this figure is illustrating our analysis pipeline. We go through this with every subject. So for subject 1, we've got repeated assessments of their passive smartphone data over 3 months and negative emotions over time. And we use a range of different algorithms to model the association between those passive data predictors and those emotional states. We use different machine learning approaches as shown here, as well as for comparison, a more simple conventional linear mixed effects model. So to keep it simple, let's say we only have 2 models here. We're only going to, or 2 algorithms. We're only going to look at elastic net and random forest. So for subject 1, we fit 2 models, 1 elastic net model and 1 random forest model. So we have 2 subject-specific models for subject 1, and that's what we're calling our individualized models, or IM at the bottom here. And the next step here is an ensembling, or a combination of these individual models using a data-driven search to try to find the optimal combination of weighting different individual models to try to maximize the accuracy of predictions for a given individual. So again, to keep it simple, let's say we only have 10 subjects in our sample, and we're only focusing on elastic net. So now we have 10 models, 10 elastic net models, 1 for every individual. And what we're doing is for subject 1, we're trying to search for the optimal combination of weights across these 10 models to maximize the predictive performance for that individual. And that's what we're calling a personalized ensemble model. It's an ensemble of individual models. Final step is that we have what we somewhat awkwardly call a double ensemble model. We just couldn't think of a better name, but it's double ensemble because it's an ensemble of individual models and an ensemble of the different algorithms that we have here. So we have 10 subjects and 3 algorithms. We have 30 models, and we're weighting those for each individual. They could have a different combination of weights. There's more details in the paper down here. First author is Boyu Ren, who's a biostatistician, and all of the analysis, we have a link to all of our analysis code in the paper. So jumping to the results, here are the results showing the predictive performance of each model. The 2 best performing models are shown in the red box at the bottom. In second place is the random forest personalized ensemble model. That's a weighted ensemble of subject-specific random forest models. And in first place is the most complex model. It's the personalized double ensemble model. Again, that's the ensemble of individual models and an ensemble of algorithms. And one thing to note here is that there really wasn't much of a difference between these 2 models. They had really similar performance. So the area under the curve is around 0.7, or if you translate that into accuracy, we had about 70% accuracy in predicting states of high anger. That was the highest. Lowest was for sadness, around 64% accuracy. So it's worth noting that the worst performing model was the simplest, the linear mixed effects model. The complex models did better. And it's also worth noting that across all the models, the accelerometer data tracking activity levels was the most predictive of heightened negative emotions. So I described that the modeling approach that we use developed individual level or subject-specific models and then searched for the optimal combination of weighting these different individual models. But what if we didn't allow for that? What if we just developed individual subject-specific models and didn't allow for this weighting? And there are some folks like Aaron Fisher and others that really have emphasized that everyone's unique and we need unique statistical models for every individual. This is top figures just showing the comparison basically between our ensemble model and a fully individualized model. So when the boxes are above this dotted line, this 0 point, which they all are, that favors the ensemble model, meaning that borrowing information from other individuals improves predictive performance for a given individual. Another way to show this is with these graphs at the bottom here, which are plotting the weights that each personalized ensemble model is placing on other individuals' models. So each row is showing with red shading how much weight is placed on a given individual's model. So for subject 1, they're putting a little bit of weight on this individual, a little bit of weight on that one, a bit of weight on that one, and a lot of weight on their own model. The diagonal are how much weight you put on your own model. And notice that if the fully individualized models yielded the best predictive performance, all of the weights, all of the red would fall on the diagonal, but it doesn't. There's some non-trivial weights that fall on other individuals' models. So basically, to summarize, this bottom figures and the top figure, they suggest that personalized predictions for a given participant benefit from borrowing information from other individuals. I think for the sake of time, I'll skip this second to last slide and I'll jump to my last slide. Limitations and future directions. We had a limited set of smartphone derived variables. Other features might improve predictive performance like call or text data, teen social media use. Maybe we could get like peripheral measures of physiological arousal from wearables. Our sample size for this initial study was quite small, sample size of 22, although we were focused on within person predictions. We do have an ongoing study with 80 subjects with up to a year of passive data and negative emotion data collection. That's a study spearheaded by Justin Baker's group. And denser EMA sampling that is getting more surveys per day. We had 2 to 3 per day. If you do more per day, that would give you more granularity and assessments of emotions over time and a larger within-person data set, but we've got to be careful not to overburden teens. So we've got an ongoing study, and we also put in a grant to address some of these points and to hopefully move this work forward. I want to thank all my collaborators here, in particular, Drs. Wren, Baker, and Rahimi. And thank you to funding sources and for your attention.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Christian. Looks like you've got some really rich data sets there. So moving on to our final speaker, Professor Helen Christensen. Helen Christensen is a professor of mental health at the University of New South Wales. She's also the former chief scientist and director of the Black Dog Institute, and she's going to be wrapping up our symposium by talking about how technology and AI can help address some of psychiatry's greatest challenges. So Helen, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Alexis. Can you see my slides?
I can.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your talks. It's just been great. I think I'm just sort of like the footnote at the end of this very interesting presentation, and I'm sort of broadening it out now to try and look at how we can potentially think about technology and its relation to psychiatry. So others have talked about this, but the aim really was to look at the future-proofing study. I just realized that my slides are not at the beginning, so excuse me a sec, I'll just have to go back here. And meanwhile, I'll try and talk as fast as I can and go through really very quickly the things that I have to say. So we already know this, we've heard this from everybody, you know, there's a huge burden of disease, mental illness that's been created, you know, partly due, I think, to changes in our society. But in this case, this is a great paper from the Lancet last year showing the orange there is the females and males, the increase in anxiety and depression as a result of COVID. So it's a very incredibly important change that we've seen in the rates of mental ill health. And we've got a real problem with waiting lists and access to treatment. I'm sure it's the same in the States and in many, many places, but this is a really nice study. I really like it, where they actually looked at using prospective secret shopper methodology, which sounds a lot more interesting sometimes than other things. They went to 317 private practices and found that the wait times were at least 44 days. So we have a problem of access and expense in Australia. There's out-of-pocket expenses for things, even though we have a pretty good health system. So we have a problem in psychiatry around access. And I'm not sure the extent to which people are aware of this 40-30-30 rule, but Tom Insel really kind of put it into place, that for every 10 people in need, you end up with only about half of a person, if that's possible, who receives full benefit. And if you change that to talking about young people, let's just think about 500 young people. We find that only 152 seek any help from their GP, 50 get science-backed therapy, and maybe 15 actually get an effective evidence-based treatment. So we have a problem in delivering evidence-based treatments to people. So what can we do about this? And I think, again, this is where psychiatry really has a number of problems, but there are solutions, including prevention, improving access, and improving the strength of treatments. Our treatments aren't good enough, and we know this, and there's a lot of hit and miss about getting the right treatment to the right person. So let's talk about technology and prevention, because that's one of the first ways I think that we need to consider the way in which technology can help. And Alexis has already mentioned this, that you get scalability when you use digital interventions. And we know that prevention works. And this is a systematic review of 50 trials of CBT, for example, which showed an effect size of around about 0.2, I think. And it shows that you can actually reduce the incidence of depressive disorder if you intervene early. So, of course, apps and websites offer great potential. They reach everyone not in contact with preventative services. Their cost is low, and you have a different financial relationship with an app to face-to-face intervention with a person. And it overcomes stigma associated with help seeking. So I just wanted to draw your attention to one of the other more recent things we've been doing in internet interventions to reach that scale. This was developed by Michelle Taruk and Jin Han. And what we tried to do was to see if a smartphone application can be useful in reducing suicide ideation in young people, individuals. And I think this is quite important, because what we're trying to do here is look at something that people don't like to think that you should be doing an internet intervention with no contact with health professionals. And so it was a smartphone app designed to help young people. It was designed as a self-help, and it used mainly DBT, but it had other things in it as well. And it had 7 brief modules. It was developed in conjunction with young people and working with a UX team, again at Black Dog. And we ran a number of different surveys and other sources of data to try and improve the intervention and make it more acceptable, I guess, to young people. And it ended up looking like this, which is a really gorgeous, I think, kind of exploration by somebody in a boat around a number of islands. And as they do each of the islands, changes in the look and feel of the app. And this is Island 2, and you can just there get a kind of feel for the quality, I guess I would say, of what it is that people are being delivered through these islands. And, you know, quite, I think, nice graphics that were approved and liked by the participants. You can find this, it was published. This is the protocol. It was to aim to look at reductions in suicide ideation, the trial flow. Here, again, I'm sort of rushing through this, but I guess the point I'm trying to make here was that we had the way that they were recruited was through Facebook ads, you know, tailored to 18 to 25-year-olds. 53,000 people viewed the ads, and 1,600 people clicked on the ads and 917 started screening. And we ended up in this study with 547 participants. Now, I guess that's saying something about the scale and the extent to which people want these sorts of things. And, you know, I think there was one day where they enrolled 300 people on one day or something. So, you know, there's a need out there, and these sort of interventions are reaching people. I won't spend too much time on this again. You've got the 84% female. Many of them had a diagnosis of a mental ill health. We looked at the sinus. We found a significant time interaction effect, showing that there was greater effect in the intervention condition compared to the control condition. And the paper has just recently been published in PLOS Medicine with first author Michelle Tarok. So I think I was really trying to emphasize there that preventative interventions using apps can be very useful. So can technology help us access to psychiatric care? And again, I guess the scalability helps there, but you can actually introduce more sophisticated type services in response to need. And I'll just briefly mention something called the 10 service that we have at Black Dog Institute, which was essentially put into place very quickly during COVID. We got it up in 2 or 3 months in order to help health professionals who were really under the pump during the beginning of the COVID crisis in 2020. And what we developed here was a intervention with health professionals who were seeking mental health support that provided a range of options, including self-help, self-guided mental health check-ins, evidence-based tools. We use This Way Up, originally developed by Gavin Andrews and Nick Titov, and now run by Mike Millard at St. Vincent's Hospital. So it's guided self-help. We had digital mental health programs from Black Dog. We had access to peer-to-peer support, psychiatrists and health professionals supporting each other. And finally, there was also the option for face-to-face through telehealth or directly in the clinic. So we had an app interface, a website, and the clinic itself. And this really just quickly shows how you can develop something that provides the access that you might need quite urgently in order to respond to people's mental health needs in particular situations. And what we found was that the web actually was much more popular than the app itself. But the bottom line there in the middle graph at the bottom basically shows here that people were responding to using the website during periods of lockdown. We had quite a lot of lockdowns in Australia. And what you can see is this fluctuation in the need and urgency. And I guess the immediate access people can get to these sorts of tools. The final histogram there actually just describes the types of people that were responding, and the most prevalent group was nurses, followed, I think, by GPs. So essentially, you got a lot of uptake. It was anonymous. It was designed for them and could be immediately pulled up. And here's some data both on the protocol and just recently a published paper about the service in BMJ Innovations, with the first author being Peter Baldwin. So, you know, you might say, well, is this really radical? And I think it's still surprisingly radical to actually pull something together like this. I guess the other group that are doing this is the technology platform MindLab, which it's always impressed me, the work of John Torres and other people. But essentially, isn't it amazing, at least in Australia and perhaps not too many places, you're actually getting these integrated, if you like, blended care models to provide quick access to people in crisis. Okay, so the final way I think that technology can help in psychiatry is through the personalization of treatments. And you've already heard from our future-proofing study, which is what Saranga talked about, and also from the Vibe Up study about how we're trying to look at treatment personalization using smartphone technologies, but also using AI to deliver treatments that are best for people with different characteristics. So we've got the future proofing study. Again, we already talked about this, and it's very similar to what Christian was talking about. What we collect there is passive data, location, device use, health data when that happens, movement, voice samples we collect in order to do something about looking at depression and voice samples. And then we've also got cognitive testing that's also available through an app. And of course, the aim of it is really to see if we can get better behavioral data to predict outcomes in the way that Christian was talking about with his data. And the future-proofing schools, we're very proud of this. We've got data, some digital data from the 7,000 14-year-olds who participated in the study, along with a lot of behavioural and linkage data that tells us quite a lot about each of those individuals. And of course, we're about to really get into kind of trying to exploit those data that we have collected. That is an actual intervention trial where we're comparing the intervention with Sparks, which was developed in New Zealand, which is an interactive online CBT prevention program for young people. Now, when it comes to digital sensing, we've heard a bit about that already. We are trying to collect data on keystrokes using the dashboard, and there's some findings that have been presented, I think, at ISRI this year, but also looking to publish around how we're measuring typing speed and how we're trying to link that to mental health outcomes. And bottom line, because I can see Lexus there shutting me down, which is fine, that essentially you get high correlations between the mental health variables, but pretty low correlations between most of those indices of typing speed. And often it's in the opposite direction to what you might actually expect. So what these data mean is really something that we're investigating in a lot more detail. So I guess our goal really is to develop a therapeutic and research platform for digital therapeutics. I won't go into it, but I think altogether bringing this together is what you're trying to do. You want validated tests, measuring things, tracking things, using AI that continuously learns about a person to deliver the right treatments at the right time. And I guess that's one of the goals, big goals that we're working with Deakin University. Instill can also be used for research, of course, because having a smartphone application like VibeUp or the Future Proofing app associated with any research study, including those that are looking at genetic material, is something that can potentially enhance many, many studies. And again, something that we want to make available for research. So I'll just finish by saying I tried to look at how technology can help with 3 challenges, looking very broadly across prevention, access, and strength of treatments. Again, acknowledge all those people who are involved. There's been so many with such large projects that we have been doing. So I'll finish there. Alexis, thank you for lurking and keeping me under control.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks for that incredible overview of all these different digital innovations. We've now got about 5 minutes for Q&A for discussion. We do have a question that's been popped into the Q&A that we could start with. In the meantime, though, I'll ask all the panelists to switch their video on if they haven't got it on already. The first question with the Q&A is around the retention for VibeUp. So why do we think, what's made the VibeUp app so particularly successful in terms of retention, and would it carry over if fully implemented at universities? So this is a great question. And one of the things that we've learned over the course of developing these digital interventions and apps at the Black Dog Institute is that it is really important to design them with the people who are going to use them, who are the research end users. And as part of VibeUp, we really implemented a thorough design process where we engaged university students with lived experience of mental ill health and got feedback at multiple points around the design of the app. and work closely with user experience designers as well to try and enhance the app look and feel. I suspect that with these apps as well, with the Vibe Up app, the interventions are really brief, easy to complete in the 2-week time period. So they're not overly burdensome and can be done anywhere. We're still blinded to quite a lot of the data in the Vibe Up trial, but when it gets unblinded and released, we can drill down and really see how patterns of user app use unfold across the different interventions. So thanks, that's a great question.
Yeah, it'd be great if there were some other questions, I think, because it has been very presentation focused. I'd like to chuck a question, if that's okay, really to Sunil, because, for example, if people want to use this conductor platform, you've described a lot of potential use cases, you and Alexis. Is that possible? I mean, how does that work, or would it work?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Yeah. So, yeah, one can think of many cases, like 1 or 2 we have seen here within this study. But you always have problems where you have few interventions or treatments and you would like to find out. Most of the time, one of our worry is that, can I conduct a trial of this length? So first thing is that if you are going to have an RCT, so there is a good chance that going through adaptive trial route allows you to have a shorter trial and therefore, smaller expenses immediately. But other than that, I think adaptive trials are very flexible, which means, for example, we have seen that they could take personalized information into account. They could even use any knowledge, for example, you might like to bring to this particular trial, let's say from any past trial or other studies which are relevant. So they could, start with some kind of a priori understanding of the effects of interventions, and adaptive trials are flexible in that sense. So again, they could utilize that to cut short the trial length to again get the kind of results you're expecting. Finally,
sorry, Sunil, I suppose my question was really more like, if somebody online was interested in using this, would they get in contact with you, or is that just
right
early?
Right. I think, yes, I think we are ready for that because we have a whole kind of variety of algorithms which could be suitable with small, changes to different applications. So I understand that everyone's application will be slightly different, not exactly what we are doing here. But there is a rich set of, variations in these methods that they can be custom tailored for, each of them, and even the conductor, for example, if you would like to go that route, is flexible enough, like it can be reconfigured, and of course there can be some functionality that needs to be added, or yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Actually, another question comes
Thanks.
through.
Sorry, Helen. Sorry to interrupt. We have to wrap up on time because the poster session is just about to launch, I've been informed. But for people who ask questions that we didn't quite get to, I'd encourage you to reach out to the panelists using the conference hall Q&A function, as well as via email if necessary. So thank you everyone for attending the symposium today. It's been great to tune in from Australia here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.